I took a look at this brand new 28mm Pancake lens from Brightin to see if it can really do what it's supposed to do, which is produce high quality images with an extremely small form factor. I put it on my M11 for some test photos, and I compared it directly with the Leica 28mm Elmarit lens. Both 28mm lenses, both very small. And finally, who is this lens for? And is the small size reason enough to pick up this lens? I was shooting outside on a bright sunny day, mostly at f8, but before getting into the images, I'll go into the unboxing. I was provided this lens to keep to make a video on it, and this is the Brightin 28mm f2.8 full frame lens with black lacquer. This one is for the Leica M mount, but it also comes in versions with the Sony, Canon, Fuji, or Nikon mounts. Retail price is $339.99, and it is made in China. The packaging on this is very nice, not too big and not too small. It came in a cardboard box with plush interior and a lens bag. The only extras were the back cap, the lens cap, and a UV filter. Specifications on this: the maximum aperture is f2.8 and goes down to f16. It weighs only 125 grams, and the thickness protrudes only 9.9 millimeters from the body. From the MTF charts, it looks like this would be fairly sharp in the center, but a rapid fall off towards the corners. The lens itself seems like it has a very good build quality. They included a very tiny UV filter, which I have installed, but the problem is I was not able to fit the lens cap back on when I have the filter on. The focus tab at the bottom is easy to use, and it feels like it has a good smooth turning action. But the aperture ring is not as easy to use. The ridges on the aperture ring are not too deep, so it's a little bit difficult to get a grip on. You kind of have to slide your finger around the dial, and if you have larger fingers, it might be more difficult to use. And it's also a continuous turning action, so there's no detents or stops at the various apertures. And the numbers are small and close together, so it's a little bit difficult to hit f8 exactly. And now we'll compare the size of the lens to the 28mm Elmarit. I always considered the Leica 28mm Elmarit to be a small and compact lens, but besides this Pancake lens, there's a drastic difference. The Brightin lens is much smaller, and it can easily fit into any pocket. I'll compare the size with the back caps off, and still there's a very big difference in size. But the aperture and focus controls on the Leica lens are easier to use, and the lettering and the styling match up with the Leica aesthetic. And the finishing is different, more of a black chrome on the Leica and a black lacquer on the Brightin lens. So I don't think the styling goes as well with the Leica M11, but I think it looks better on the Leica MP. The black lacquer of the lens matches up with the black paint of the camera body. So this makes a very compact setup if you just want to travel very small. But the sacrifice with this small size is that the focus ring and aperture ring are just slightly more difficult to use. Getting into the sample photos, I shot these photos on the M11 with auto shutter speed and auto ISO at f8 to test out the sharpness and at f2.8 to test out the bokeh. And all of these images are unedited straight out of the camera. And as far as the colors, I'm pretty happy with this. They look pretty lifelike and pretty good contrast. And without zooming in closely, the sharpness of these images also looks very nice. I was expecting to see more heavy vignetting, but I really didn't see that. And I did not see any excess distortion compared to another 28mm lens. And these last two images were at f2.8 to test out the bokeh, and as expected, I really did not see any strong bokeh effect. Focusing in on the statue, there's just some slight blurring of the leaves in the background, but not too much. But comparing directly to the 28mm Leica Elmarit, this is where you can start to see some of the disadvantages of the Brightin lens. As far as the color rendering, they actually look quite similar, and I don't see any advantage of either lens. And for the bokeh effect, wide open at 2.8 on both lenses. This also looks very similar, with a similar blurring out of the trees in the background. Shooting straight into the sun and no flaring on this image, but the leaves on the trees look slightly hazy on the Brightin star, and the leaves on the trees look sharper on the Leica Elmarit. But the real difference between these two lenses really comes down to sharpness. Again, without zooming in, there's not that much difference. But when I zoom in to the rock formation in the very center, I see a very clear difference and much more sharpness with the Leica lens. Same here with the clock face. Zooming in on the clock face, it's much sharper on the Leica lens, and you can make out the lettering more clearly. But the difference is even more clear towards the edges. I'll zoom in on the brick pavement on the lower right-hand side of the image. The Leica lens on the left maintains its sharpness towards the edge of the image, but the Brightin star lens shows a very sharp fall off in sharpness towards the edges and very clearly blurring out of the bricks. And this is very consistent with the MTF charts, showing a clear fall off in contrast towards the edge of the image. This is not a criticism of the Brightin star lens, it's more of a testament to how good the Elmarit lens really is. My takeaway of this lens so far is that this is a very tiny lens. The controls are not that easy to use, but it does produce images with good colors and good contrast, and no excessive vignetting or flaring. The sharpness is decent in the very center without zooming in, not as sharp as the 28mm Elmarit, and there is a very rapid fall off in sharpness towards the edges. But you have to consider the cost. At $340, this is a pretty good value proposition, and the Leica lens is much more expensive. So who is this lens for? I think if you mainly shoot 35 or 50, this would be a very good second lens to have. Just slips into your pocket and useful for the occasional wide shot. But for me, if I'm shooting 28mm on the M11, I'll stick with the Leica 28mm Elmarit lens. For the extra sharpness, it's still a compact setup, the controls are easier to use, and the aesthetic matches up more closely with the M11 body. And for me, it might make more sense to use this on my Leica MP camera, where I don't need that extra sharpness. The black lacquer of the lens matches up closely to the black paint, and it's a very compact setup. And if I'm shooting mainly 50mm, I could bring this lens along as an extra lens. So I do want to test this out on my Leica MP.